Thank you for joining us for 10 Minutes with the Artist, an episodic series that explores the art practice and the personal vision that guides artists. On today's episode, we're very proud to have Carmen Johnson, who's completing her master's in architecture at North Dakota State University. We invited Carmen to come speak about her research and the creation of artifacts and preparation of her defense. Carmen's work examines how modern technology has become detached from tradition. She creates copies upon copies of mass-produced items that would lose their sense of individuality if not for their faults, which are caused by human interference and made even more pronounced by the machine's lack of recognition and resolving a single issue that then cascades into a product that is nothing but unique. I'm Anthony Ferris, and this is 10 Minutes with the Artist. So Carmen, thank you so very much for being here with us on 10 Minutes with the Artist. So there's this old phrase in woodworking that you measure twice and then you cut once. And if you end up sort of messing up, you just end up compensating over and over and over again in whatever piece that you're creating. The funny thing with the machines that you're working with is that they don't have that sort of visual acuity or programming to notice when something goes wrong. Mm-hmm. And so they'll just continue to glaze over it, and the issue will get worse and worse and worse. So I was wondering if you can talk about that sort of action as a metaphor in your piece.
Sure. So I have definitely witnessed the woodworking example when I'm making models, and that can kind of be dealt with because you can shave it off. But with the 3D printing, it has to be extremely accurate in order to fit. If you're creating a model or something and it's a component of an architectural piece that you're working with, these models or these parametric entities that we're creating have to be very precise, and that doesn't often happen with our 3D printers. A lot of times they'll make an error. Just a slight adjustment in the path throws the entire thing off into a sort of chaotic environment. And so I saved those chaotic mess-ups, those mistakes, and I actually took that as a source of inspiration for my work. And I think it's interesting to be inspired by these mistakes or what people would call errors. I find inspiration and beauty. So I'm kind of trying to integrate those things into my architecture.
Okay. So, there's this push and pull with something that's handmade versus something that's machine-made. During the 80s, there was a huge sort of DIY movement, and it's still going on today, where people are looking for handmade items, right? Mm-hmm. So I agree with you that there is something really kind of interesting and beautiful about something that's handmade, and there's like a sort of sense of mystery. But there's also something really gorgeous in looking at an iPad or something that's like really well designed and well crafted. And it's really funny that some people take things that are like really unique as being very special, and then other people look at the brand of an iPad, and everybody has one, say, so like it becomes part of its own culture. Mm-hmm. If I have one, you have one, then we're part of the same sort of group. So can you talk a little bit about that difference between something that's handmade and the mystery and sort of specialness to it versus something that's machine-made?
Yeah, I guess if we were to talk architecturally, I would argue that you wouldn't want the same building in a bunch of different places. I think it has to be contextual. So if you had an iPad of a building in every city, I don't think it would be exciting or meaningful. So having this modularity trend in architecture kind of annoys me, especially if they're going to be using 3D printing technology, which has the capability to make every object customized or unique, and it doesn't take extra work or extra labor, extra money. And I think that should be capitalized on rather than creating modular components in an architectural sense. Maybe on the small scale of mass producing objects that everyone wants, but I guess I'm looking at a larger scale architectural viewpoint of it.
Okay. So I'm going to continue on this kind of conversation of sort of machine-made versus handmade for just a moment because I'm very interested in it. So what's kind of interesting is that you've created this thing, right, that you've maybe haven't touched, but you did create it, like by hand, by designing it in some sort of manner. So there was some sort of like handmade component to it. So what's it like to see something that you've created to be a perfect form, right? Turned into a whole bunch of different things. Like it's like watching something that you created be destroyed in 50 different ways or changed into 50 different ways.
Right. I guess at first it would probably be frustrating, but the premise of my thesis is to kind of accept these things and maybe not implement them directly into the building. I think there's a problem with taking what's created and accepting its problems and then just leaving it. I think taking direction from that and improving upon it and constantly working between seeing what's produced and then taking a human perspective and changing things so that it fits. I think that's a good way to work rather than caring so much about having your initial intention be executed perfectly. That's one extreme. The other extreme would be to ignore the mistake or just let it be and throw it in there and say that's good enough. I think there has to be kind of a working between the two.
Okay. Can you talk about, could I view this body of work by just looking at one and get the same takeaway, or do I need to see it as a group?
Definitely needs to be a group.
Okay, and why would that be?
In the grid-like structure of how I've arranged these, it calls attention to the differences between them. And by putting them in a grid, that recalls the system of the mode of reproductive production, like in an industrial plant in the past, and kind of a modular sense of thinking. And then to throw these variations in starts to create that space of interpretation. And so when you're thinking about the hand as your own hand, if you were to only see one, that's how you would think of it without a comparison to something else that's maybe more accurate or more misplaced, I guess.
Okay. I think I've told you before that when I was looking at this body of work, it sort of reminded me of the Belgians in Congo, that they would cut off the hands of people that weren't necessarily getting their rubber quota during the 1800s and early 1900s, I guess. And this was done in the name of progress. So I think that there's several ways that you could read your work in a historical context. I'm kind of curious what the feedback that you've been getting and the responses that you've been getting from your work. Has it sort of been developing stories? Are people telling you stories when they look at it? How are they reading your work?
Most times people will pick up a hand and kind of put it in place of their own and judge it, I guess, or pretend that it's their own. And so I think it's a little disturbing to see some of them being contorted and twisted and cut off, and some are sliced. And so I think this anatomical relationship, this cutting and mutating, is a little disturbing, and it calls back maybe to the dangers of industrial plants in the past, losing limbs and things like that. And then also by putting it on a brick wall, protruding out of it, there's a sense of it also getting cut off.
Okay. At the very end of our interviews, we sort of like to ask a few questions about your creative process. So I was curious, what time of day you feel like you're most creative?
Probably after 2 when everyone leaves the studio, 2 a.m.
Okay. Do you listen to music or anything like that when you're working?
I do. If I'm in major production mode, it has to be something with a steady kind of progressive beat and no words.
Okay.
Otherwise I'll get distracted.
Okay. Are you reading anything right now?
Currently I'm not, but we did a lot prior to this, of course, to contextualize it. We did a lot of philosophy and hermeneutical theory, that sort of thing, and that really contextualized my ideas. So at this point I think it's kind of all those readings are in my brain now and they're coming out through my work.
Okay. And what has been the most challenging thing about working in the media that you're working in?
As far as architecture versus
Well, with the
art?
artifacts that you've been sort of creating, have there been any sort of challenges that have been difficult, or?
I guess I kind of embraced it with the 3D printing.
Okay.
You know, I mean, the challenge is that it doesn't always produce what you want it to produce, and I just took everything that I threw at it.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then the last question would be, what's next for you?
Well, currently I'm translating this artifact into architecture for my thesis, and then I'll be actually taking this forward to Cornell for my post-professional degree and hopefully developing it even further, maybe looking more into the parametrics and trying to do some of my own parametric work.
Okay, well, perfect. Well, thank you so very much. I'd like to thank you, and I'd also like to thank you at home for your time and your interest in the professional practice and the creative explorations happening here at North Dakota State University. So, thank you, and for everyone here at the Memorial Union Gallery, keep creative.